Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Let's Talk Assassin's Creed, your number one podcast for all things Assassin's Creed. In today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at a unique idea, and it will feature some spoilers for Assassin's Creed Valhalla. So, this is officially my first pre-completing Valhalla podcast. So, in today, we're going to take a look at Ragnarok and why Ragnarok made Vikings the perfect setting for Assassin's Creed Valhalla. But I also want to look at why Ragnarok fits perfectly into the Toba catastrophe and the Isu myths of destruction. But I'm not going to stop there. Digging for this episode, I found a really interesting piece of information for Mesopotamian myths, which kind of fits perfectly into Isu lore and could see where the game's series will go next. But we are not alone in this episode. We are actually joined by Ammit from the Sisterhood server.
Hello, I am Ammit.
Glad to have you on board.
Great to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
I feel like I'm dragging everyone I know on this show.
We're all very happy to join and rant about Assassin's Creed at any point.
I think there's about 1,000 people in the Sisterhood server for me to try and capture onto this podcast.
And everyone is an expert in something, so I'm sure you have no issues.
See, this is my insurance policy for future questions. Get everyone on as a guest and just talk about what they do in the community. 1,000 episodes.
Well, I don't see why not.
So let's get the big elephant in the room out the way. Ragnarok.
The end of days.
Well, it's surprising that, as I put out in a tweet on Sunday last week, me and Andrew from Visions of the Past and a friend in the Let's Talk server actually all predicted Ragnarok for Valhalla before Valhalla came out. Which is spooky.
Yeah, well, knowing that it was about Vikings and knowing that the Isu are terrified of destruction and catastrophe, it was spooky. A safe choice, safe bet, but props to you guys for predicting that.
And I think one of the biggest reasons we predicted it, and I would love to get your thoughts on this, is that back in Origins we were teased with the empirical code. Empirical truth. And that talked about how Desmond averted the Node of Time, and the Node of Time wanted to correct itself. And Ragnarok is a tale of destruction, but creation, of time essentially fixing itself, because the gods will be gone, but humans will arise from the ashes. Which is weird, how we always seem to be the ones that are going against gods and becoming more bigger.
And and inheriting the world that they leave behind, not necessarily making it better, definitely surviving even the god.
So this is kind of a unique take. If the Toba catastrophe was designed to wipe out all life and is foretold as Ragnarok, then why is it such a big thing for the Isu to prevent it if creation is birthed from the destruction?
Right. That's a $1 million question. And so how would different civilizations, knowing what the Isu were about, interpret this myth, interpret what happened in their own myth, which was what actually drew me to coming to your podcast, because I thought that your take on the Babylonian myth was awesome.
And yes, see, this is the biggest thing. A lot of time Assassin's Creed is historical, and it has to be historical, but mythology is a driving part of history. It creates a lot of the historical culture we know, and Ragnarok being the tale of destruction could not be ignored. It has to be talked about in a game. And as we see through Valhalla, Ragnarok is how sages are created. If you took Ragnarok out of the game, how would we know how sages were made?
Right. And also, Yeah, and it was also like all the catastrophe was these origins, as you said, in all those weird recordings that buy at sea, although not in the terms of Ragnarok. But hmm, I wonder.
And you did rightly say with the Babylonian myth, and this is probably going to be the biggest part of the episode. So I will just quickly point out that we will be going back to Ragnarok soon, because Ragnarok, I do believe, is the pivotal point for Assassin's Creed story going forward. The Toba catastrophe was just ended, well, happened, but it was averted because of what happened in Ragnarok through the sages. But further back, we have a Mesopotamian myth that really screams more Isu than Ragnarok. And surprisingly, I don't understand why the games didn't go here first, but I believe the games could go here next. And we can't read the whole myth. I think we'll be here all night. I've tried. It's a fantastic myth. I love it, but I'll be here all night. So I'm going to highlight the crux of it, the big part that I think screams Isu. And just like Ragnarok, this would fit into the Isu human dialogue. So the Mesopotamian myth believes that there was a separation between the higher and the lower gods. My interpretation would be the capital triad as the higher gods, and the lower gods being like Odin, Loki, people like that. The higher gods would make the lower ones work for them, so they create humans to help carry the workload. They soon came to regret the decision, as humans were often rowdy, loud, and quickly overpopulated. To be rid of the mistakes, when the higher gods Enel sent a flood to wipe them out, they soon realized that even though it was quite at last, they still need people to work for them, so they allowed the few survivors to repopulate, with a promise that they never repeat that act of mass destruction. To keep humans in check, they give them shorter lifespans and sent war beasts and diseases to ensure that they would not get harmed again. And I would love to hear your take on this theory, but when you watch the Truth video at the end of Valhalla and you see the sages being born, Ragnarok is coming, we're all going out there with weapons. What if the reason why the Isu could never figure out how to stop the Toba catastrophe was because there was a branch of Isu higher than the capital triad and everything, working to ensure the Toba catastrophe went ahead because they didn't want humans to last long. It was the ultimate 10-year war with the humans. How do we survive? Let's just wipe all the humans out. But it didn't work.
Failed spectacularly. And even when they create the sages, and this is massive spoilers, whoever has not finished the game, in one of the anomalies, you can hear Loki discussing, "Oh, do we really have to be reborn as humans?" So, in a sense, trying to prevent the catastrophe and trying to wipe out humans backfired, because at the end of the day, all the Izu achieved was to be reborn as human without remembering that they were Izu. So whatever they were trying to get there actually went the other way around. It went back. So, and I actually laughed when I listened to that recording the second time, realized the whole thing. They had managed to kind of survive the catastrophe, and yet they had become the very thing they tried to wipe out. They had become humans. I don't know if what is your take on that and how you read that? I don't know if you've done that anomaly yet, to be fair, but I'm curious to hear what you thought of it and the irony of the whole thing.
I've completed all the anomalies, and I do find the anomalies very ironic in nature, but I think the anomalies open up a hidden path to the lore that we haven't really looked at, which is why this episode was perfect, because in a lot of the memories from Loki, from Bastium and his life, he talks about the father, and I think it's called the Voiceless One. They have code names, and then they have Harvey, Odin, which was the Mad One, And to me, it's like they take orders from someone above them and they've stayed silent through all of this. And this is what got me thinking, they've stayed silent, but if the Isu could create a shroud a shroud to cheat death, an apple to hypnotize people, the faith prong from the Last Descendants novel gets people to essentially give their free will over. How could they not stop the Toba catastrophe?
So it had to be on purpose. It had to be, made on purpose, which brings us back to the myth. Because in not just in the Babylonian myth, but also in the Egyptian myths and the Greek ones, which are what I teach, it's always humans being too rowdy, too many, and not honoring the gods enough that gets them wiped out. And there is always a god who decides to save them somehow. That is the thread that ties all the catastrophe and destruction myths, that humans always survive somehow. No one ever achieves the complete destruction of humankind, which is exactly what the Izu are doing. And I'm really glad that you brought that point up, because I had not realized it 5 seconds ago. But that's it. That's what happens.
Well, one of the things, and this is going back to Ragnarok, one of the things that I only found out while doing this episode, so it isn't an old theory, it's one I've been crafting since I've done my homework for this episode, is it wasn't until the 8th simulation, which is what Ragnarok is through Asgard and Jotunheim, that they realized that they could have the elixir that could create sages. So, reading the Mesopotamian myth and looking at Ragnarok, I kind of get the feeling that even though they are being born as human, sages can be awakened upon great danger or death, which is why when Sigurd, big spoiler, was tortured so much, he awoke in Tyr. When Eivor was bitten by the wolf at the very, very start of Valhalla, she awoke in Harvey, which is why there was 2 DNA streams at once. So, having humans being so frail, so easy to die with disease, could create I think they're called sleeper agents, where the disease would kill them, but it would awaken the Isu. And maybe effectively what makes them Isu is made them survive them diseases.
That's a very interesting. Yeah, actually makes a lot of sense, because if you need trauma to trigger the Isu memories and the Isu identity, to come forth, then yes, definitely being reincarnated is something that is, it can be traumatized more easily, because these are not easily shaken by anything, whereas humans, puny, would make sense. So I would wonder if any Izu to be, let's say, awoken needs a trauma, or if it can happen for anything else. But from Valhalla, we seem to be told that you need something awful to happen to you to, to go back to your Isu memories, which I'm now wondering if that's because Ragnarok is such a traumatic event for everyone that only something just as bad, but in human, would make them aware of being sages. I don't know what you think of that.
I was thinking it from a psychological point of view, that the old saying that when you die, your life flashes before your eyes, it's a sudden impulse of electrical nodes through your body, which is why they do say that if you're unresponsive, you get jolted with electricity to restart your heart. There is that whole theory that if the body dies for even a brief second, that sudden urge of neurons and electricity could kickstart the DNA. So even if it's through trauma, or I've had a theory for a long time, but I've not been able to confirm it, the animus through a bleeding effect, if it's possible to awaken a sage through the bleeding effect system, I think great trauma is just a way to kickstart the body to producing enough chemicals to start an electric reaction to open up the DNA that is a sage.
Yes, that actually makes perfect sense. But do you think it has to be something somehow connected to what happened in their Isu life? Because Harvey wakes up when Eivor is assaulted by a wolf, and we know that Harvey was terrified of being killed by a wolf. And Tyr wakes up when Sigurd loses his arm, which is exactly what Tyr. So do you think there's a one-on-one connection there, like something that happened in your Isu life needs to trigger your memories?
So similar to a PTSD sort of thing, that
Right.
you get such a flashback of a memory that awakens what really happened. So then that would take an effect that what they did through Ragnarok to create the sages isn't just locked in your DNA, but it needs a specific mental trigger. So if an Isu's mental trigger was he died because he saw something yellow, sounds stupid, I know, or in a field of
A
daisies,
banana.
or a banana, yeah, and then all of a sudden he eats his first banana and he's awakened as a sage. That would be an interesting take.
But yeah, well, it would have to be something very specific, like a very specific. Otherwise, considering how violent the Vikings was, someone like, big spoiler here, Thor could have been awakened at any time if Halfdan had gone to battle. But it must have been something specific to Thor that did not click for him, and so he did not realize who he was in his previous life. No bananas in him.
That's an interesting take because Ragnarok, even though Ragnarok tells us the tale of destruction and creation, and with Valhalla's tale of it and how the Ragnarok was tied to sages, you are right in saying that a lot of sages have stayed hidden because nothing's triggered them. So if you took if you take a look at Harvey and Tyr, they were triggered because of the ending of Ragnarok. Tyr lost his arm when they were trying to tame Fenrir. Harvey was killed by a wolf, Fenrir, and
Yeah.
Odin was not Odin. Thor was killed by the world serpent.
Mhm.
So if the world serpent was resurrected as a sage and tried to punch Thor in the face, I forgot what his name in the game is already.
He's Halfdan. I think it's Halfdan. Yeah, he's Halfdan. Ragnarsson.
So if the world serpent, because I know that must be an Isu, was reincarnated and punched Halfdan in the face, I'm pretty sure that would trigger a memory because that's you are the person that killed me in a previous life. We're not going through this again. I
Exactly. Exactly. Huh.
I I don't know if we've talked about it in the Sisterhood server, but Basim lost a child
Yes.
when he was
Yes.
human. That would have triggered his Isu stage because it was Odin who stole his first child, Fenrir.
Exactly. Exactly. And he retaliated by killing his son. But yeah, so Basim must have actually lost like a son in real life, and then that brought back Loki in his memories.
So,
So yeah. Huh.
so in theory, could it be stated that after all the trial and error, the eighth simulation was Ragnarok, so they accepted that they were never going to survive. It was an acceptance that Isu had to die. But to cheat death, they could create the humans that they so despise as basic sleeper agents for them. How do they cheat destruction to live through creation?
Yeah. I think that's the fair statement. They created the humans as best for their contents of sages to cheat death. Just yeah, it is kind of cheating. Well, their Izu bodies die, but their memories, their how do they call it? Their Huger, their magic survived in them. So they perfected how to avoid a catastrophe from wiping them away. But then again, now I'm wondering if they were also somehow trying to make the humans survive. Because if all the humans had been wiped out, then they would have not reincarnated. Or am I missing something?
So I'm gonna say dinosaurs because I really don't know where dinosaurs fit in the Isu timeline. So I'm saying dinosaurs, but war beasts and diseases is naturally what humans have to face against anyway. So what if Ragnarok, whatever the first turbo catastrophe actually was, what if there is a big coup, or whatever the word is, where the Isu realize they can't stop it. If they stop it, it's just going to start again and again and again and again. It's the biggest theme of Ragnarok isn't destruction, but it's a cycle of destruction and creation. And what if the Isu knew that this cycle of destruction and creation was forever going? So they created a way of when new life grows, they grow with it. And I know it's spinning back on the whole sleeper agents, but creating it so when anything dies, that new life is grown through animals, diseases, predators, and prey, and then they come back with it. The ultimate creation myth is cheating death itself.
That's true. And making sure that they are always there. Well, let's say a parasite, because they keep recurring. So they set up, well, they know that the cycle is never ending. So they make sure to always be there. I am wondering if there is an end, well, let's call it reincarnation cycle, but I don't think we've had an answer to that in the game. But it would be interesting to see if there's like a limit to how many times stages can be reborn, sages.
I will have to do more research onto that. Is there any, to your knowledge, any more creation myths that could tie in with the theme of the gods finding a way of cheating death?
Cheating death for the
Or
gods, not a lot. Mostly because, to my knowledge, this may be because I'm trained in classic, the only gods that actually all die in a final catastrophe. But plenty of destruction myth from which the humans come out on top. And, slightly called destruction and then the humans. So, and I would be shocked if, the Assassin's Creed developers did not read all of them before deciding, oh, we're going for Ragnarok, because it's actually the one that makes the most sense for the next game.
so, last question I'm going to ask for this episode. Darby McDevitt teased it. Was either Darby McDevitt or somebody? I may have got this fact wrong. I really feel stupid bringing it up. But he teased that this cycle of games is like a mythical trilogy. You've got the and he created 3 new pantheons for Isu. He's got the European Isu, which is like the Greek gods, I'm gonna say Italian gods, but I don't really think Rome had that many gods compared to Greeks. I mean, they just stole Greek gods.
Well, they work and they had their own, so why not unite it? If it works, you make it. You don't just discard it because it comes from someone. You adapt it and reuse it. The practical Romans.
That's a clever, right? So, and then you have the African gods, which is what you see in is the Isu from Curse of the Pharaohs. So, and then now you have the northern Isu, which is the Norse gods, and maybe the Celtic gods from the Wrath of the Druids. So, my last question to you is what if eventually, when we learn as much as we can from Isu, we find out that the Norse heritage is going to be the last standing people because of their knowledge of sage technology? Now, we know that Juno brought her husband back through the sage, but she never brought herself back. So, what if that knowledge is limited to the Norse gods and no one else?
I think that is a very interesting theory, and that's very plausible, because the Norse gods are the only ones in mythology that manage to cheat their own destruction somehow. And even after Ragnarok in myth, when the elder gods are dead, their children inherit control over the universe. So I think that that's probably what will happen with all these Isu plans. Either others manage to survive in sages in other ways that then cannot be related to mythology, or we will only have, the Norse because they managed to exist and put themselves into the machine. I guess we'll have to see. We'll have to wait and see. And also to see what happens with the Irish in Wrath of the Druids, which I'm worried about at this point.
So we know that the only person to have contact with the capital triad and was a sage was Attaya. Now, if the Norse myths were not the only ones to have such technology, then why was Minerva, Juno not able to come back through sages, but had to find other means to come back? So it does make sense. It's a possibility that maybe there's more to it than we realize.
Maybe more technology, more easy technology than we think, with which they try to keep death and come back, but we don't know it yet. Guess we'll have to see. But I thought that making the Norse Izu come back as sages with the Yggdrasil device it was excellent, and it actually made sense even for like Norse person from the 10th century AD, because they would have kind of understood what was going on with uploading your magic, your voodoo into the tree, which is what Eivor thinks. But we actually know that they're drinking weird things and uploading their consciousness into their machine.
It's a weird thing, especially with the Tree of Life. That Tree of Life machine gives me nightmares. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, I'm not a fan, and I know that Darby said that Svala used it properly by going there when she was old and just uploading herself into Valhalla forever. But I don't know, I'm into that. I don't buy that.
Uh, was Zavala? Zavala was Freya, wasn't she?
Yes, yes,
Ah,
indeed.
I
We're
thought
not gonna
so.
ask ourselves. We're not gonna ask ourselves what kind of memory triggered the sage in her. Probably can't, considering Freya.
Hmm. I'm not too sure. I know that I've seen in the Wikipedia for Assassin's Creed that a lot of sages can live normal lives with never knowing that they're sages. So
Definitely.
maybe she just got old without knowing she was a sage till the very end when the memories start coming back slowly, and she's like, you know what, one final time, I'll go to Valhalla.
Maybe she drank her daughter's tea. I mean, have you seen what she puts in their tea? It's hallucinogenic mushroom. So maybe that's what triggered her.
That'll be one weird way, one day you're just some happy old lady next to drinking some mushroom tea, and it's like, you're a god. Okay, my life makes no sense now. Thank you.
Thank you, daughter. I'm very grateful for this tea you made. That made me lose my mind. Well, what a happy family.
So sadly, this is all we have time for tonight. I'm very curious about where we go from here for Assassin's Creed.
It will be, I guess it's going to be breathtaking. I hope it's going to be breathtaking. And we're going to get more takes on ancient mythology.
Ooh, more mythology. I just want more on Basim. I want to know what Loki's been up to.
I want to see more Isu technology without, the filter, the ancient gods. Just give us the good Isu stuff.
Well, from what I'm seeing from Valhalla, it's going to sound a bold statement, and probably people might come at me with pitchforks, but what
Heard
if
it here first, people.
what if these creation myths and mythology and yada 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 isn't actually fantasy? Okay, this is where people it gets real, but scientific. That we see it as fantasy because we've read the books in real life. But as I asked the question in the Sisterhood server, is Loki the Isu name or the human name? There is a possibility that a human saw a memory, reinterpret it as a myth, Chinese whispers, and it becomes fantasy. So, as I've advocated for years, mythology belongs in Assassin's Creed because it can be canon if it's, through a scientific possibility. Like the weird tree of life. That's scientifically possible, but terrifying.
Yeah, and so they have to reinterpret its mythology to make it make sense. I absolutely agree with you. And I think that the way in which they've shown mythology in Assassin's Creed until now has been because it makes sense for the characters. And then it's funny for us to try and see what technology behind the myth, as you said.
I generally believe that how Valhalla. Honestly, I do understand with the beasts and everything was a bit very fanciful, but I strongly will advocate that Valhalla's attempt to ground in mythology was successful and something I could see going forward.
Yeah. Yeah. I would like to see more than that. And we will see more than that. And like, wait,
So, if you guys want to be on the show, like I'm Nate and everyone else, and you know how to find me, I've got an email, assassinscreedletstalk@gmail.com, or you can just send me a message through Twitter. My DMs are open. If you want to support the show, there is a Ko-fi link in the description. And um, I hope to see you all next week.
thank you for having me. And, talk to you on the server.
Yeah, I never showed up on the server. I'm
Shoot.
always talking. Shh, don't tell people this.
Have this.